Today on Digging Deeper, we have with us McKensie Worley, internal consultant. So she's McKensie Consulting.
Hello and welcome to tonight's show.
All right. Today, our topic comes from your R Squared presentation, our famous client event, R Squared. It was called, what was it called? I think I named it. It was The Voice of Drivers Unveiled.
That's right.
McKensie unveiled the voice of drivers to us. Now, the idea obviously being we're trying to talk about what matters most to drivers, right? So we're all here in the business of learning how to attract drivers. And so she went on a big, long, arduous journey to find out how best to attract them. Why don't you tell us about the journey a little bit?
Okay. So it involved both qualitative and quantitative research. So qualitative being, we run about 1,000 campaigns every month, digital marketing, targeting drivers, helping companies hire drivers, analyzing all of that data, thousands of campaigns worth of data. Then quantitative being survey data, interviewing drivers. I spoke with probably 15 to 20 drivers myself and just gathered all that data that I could to try to get a complete picture of what it is that drivers really want.
So if you're kind of looking at the difference of those two things, it's almost like what do drivers say that they want versus what do their actions say that they want?
Exactly.
Okay.
And the two are not always the same.
Right.
Or rarely are the same.
That's true. That's true. Now, I don't want to give away the punchline, but I like how you kind of did this when I watched you present this, is the punchline is not really the punchline, if that makes sense. It's
Yep.
the what we found, and I'll let you say what you found that matters to drivers. It turns out drivers are a lot like humans because they are humans, believe it or not. So
we would naturally think that drivers want pay and home time. I mean,
Right.
We see it in non-driving jobs. We see it in blue collar, white collar jobs. We see it just in our own motivations. We want more salaries, more pay, more time, more money to be able to do the things we want to do, and more time to be able to do those things. And a lot of the surveys with drivers tells us that very same thing. And a lot of the qualitative data will also tell us the same thing, that drivers are motivated by pay and home time.
right. And I think if I remember correctly, when you went through it, you said that if you were to survey any industry, time and money is what it is. It
Yep.
all comes back to time and money. So I remember you saying like, okay, are we just going to sit here and talk about time and money, for an hour? Because everybody knows that. But what I think what you discovered and the bulk of what we're going to talk about today is that there's some nuance there that I think a lot of fleets miss. It's not as simple as time and money. But if we are going to talk about money, let's get into a little bit of what you discovered when we look at time and money. So if the average pay being advertised to drivers, so this is not necessarily what they report making, but the average pay being advertised to drivers right now is the average for a company driver is around 80.8 thousand a month, or sorry, a year.
I will be switching to driving if that were the case.
And then for owner operator, the median advertised salary is around 190K.
That's right.
Right now. All right. And then according to our own research, the most common type of pay is still what?
Still CPM. It's the most traditional. It's what drivers see CPM and they know exactly how to interpret that. But we're seeing salary pay and weekly pay becoming more and more common. A lot of ads will even say both. This is the CPM. This is what it equates to on a weekly basis or even a monthly or annual basis. And drivers are responding really well to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now when we surveyed drivers, the most reported attractive type of pay, the thing that had the biggest impact on an ad was, I believe, guaranteed pay. And then the least attractive, the one that nobody liked, was percentage pay.
Yep.
Now, I think what we've discovered is that, well, what's funny is none of those say anything about, how much you're getting paid necessarily. And the reason, and I've heard, now I may be wrong, and call in and tell us if we're wrong. The least attractive being percentage pay. Percentage pay actually ends up paying more a lot of the times, but what drivers don't like about it is that it's confusing.
That's right.
Which is a bit of a hint to, I think, the big aha moment.
That's right.
Now, so we've kind of covered, if we're talking about money's the big deal, time and money, we've kind of say where are we at with money? What's the average, being advertised, not necessarily what they say they make, but what's being advertised, what is the format that they like to be paid in. Now, you kind of got to this point where like, is it really that simple of just time and money? If you offer to pay more, then you win. Is that the whole game? And you interviewed a particular driver, and I want you to tell that story because I think it really catalyzes where this conversation is headed.
Yeah. So my gut feeling when I looked at all this data and it showed time and money were the two motivating factors, I just felt like there had to be more to it because I've worked with fleets who offer the best pay and the best home time, and they still struggle with recruiting and retention. And so it was this one particular driver who told me that he had been driving for this same fleet for about 12 years. And he said that he had no desire to leave. And so I asked him, like, is there anything that would make you leave? And he said, well, more pay. And I was like, of course, here we go, more pay.
Yeah, right back to pay.
But so my next question was, that means in 12 years, you've never come across anyone who pays you more. Like, you found the company that pays the most out of anyone. And he was like, well, no, of course not. He said it would take a lot more pay. And he said, I've got it too good where I'm at for me to just up and leave. And so it just kind of clicked in that moment that it's not just about this number and trying to reach a top dollar amount. It's about finding that sweet spot of having a great job and a great company that pays you well at the same time, or pays you an equivalent for the amount of work and effort you have to put in.
So you introduced this idea that you stole from How I Met Your Mother, which we won't get into that part, but it's this idea of the friction pay scale. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about the friction pay scale?
So it's the idea that you have to have this balance between how much pay you're offering a driver and how much friction your job introduces. And we can spend some time talking about what exactly friction means, but friction would just be anything that's causing you discomfort in your job. And so if you're going to have a lot of discomfort in your job, maybe you're out 3 weeks at a time, or you're hauling flatbed loads in the snow or something, you better pay pretty well, like really well, to kind of balance out that friction. On the opposite side, if you have a really cushion job, it's really easy, home every night, you could probably get away with lower pay and drivers will be perfectly happy. So it's finding that balance.
Right. So there's this inherent ratio of, if you have a job that, it's out 3 weeks at a time, it's very difficult and all the other parameters that we'll get into, then yes, you're going to have to pay more.
That's right.
Yeah. So, all right. Now, you said we talk about the types of friction. What are the types of friction that we kind of talked about are what caused the pay scale to kind of go up?
Yep. So going back to pay and home time,
right,
this is where some of those nuances in pay and home time come in, because low pay in and of itself is not necessarily friction. It's inconsistent pay or unpredictable pay or pay that's extremely confusing to figure out what you're going to make. Things like that can cause friction.
Right.
Or unpredictable home time. People who are they're told they're going to be out for a week, and then their dispatchers convince them to be out for 3 weeks. Like things like that. That causes a lot of friction. But then there's other things like working with really difficult shippers. I saw this post on LinkedIn recently that a driver had taken a picture when he went into a shipper's office, and it said, "You're here for us. You can wait until we're ready for you to come in." And he was like, this is the kind of shipper I want to work with.
The infamous Scott Maldonado, who I'm sure will be back this season, he told me, I was doing a presentation one time and I was kind of going through it with him, and he was telling me, like, and it speaks right to this idea of friction, that every single department in the fleet needs to think of themselves in recruiting. And one of the big things he said, like sales, sales or in recruiting. They need to be looking to pick up freight that is attractive to drivers, that the route's attractive to drivers. It should be about the driver rather than, just what's the most profitable that
That's
you can
right.
find.
And that also means we should be surveying our drivers and
Right.
finding out, which shippers do you like to work with? Which lanes do you like to drive? Which hours are convenient for you and your family? Like, we should be finding that out from our drivers, not just making an assumption and then expecting our drivers to just go with the flow.
Now, also, it's along the same lines of friction. One thing we found in our survey is one of the biggest reasons that drivers will leave a fleet. We said that one reason they'll look is pay, but one reason they will pull the trigger is maintenance issues. Dispatch and maintenance issues are one of the biggest drivers of why someone will leave your fleet. And, doesn't have anything to do with pay.
That's right.
So it's like you can, if maybe you can't afford to pay more, but if you can create, as little friction as possible, or at least control the things that you can control, you can keep a lot more drivers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The whole phrase, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. Well, with drivers, it's somewhat managers, but it's also dispatchers, it's maintenance, it's their vehicles, it's their driving conditions. They don't just leave a job because they found better pay.
Right.
They leave for a lot of other reasons.
Right. Now, I believe there was another little nuance that was very interesting that I don't think a lot of fleets think about, is when you talked about the way someone views friction changes over time based off of where they are in life. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it became really obvious when I interviewed two totally different drivers, different stages of life. One was a recent graduate. He had no family. It was just him. And he said, I'm out on the road right now, but as soon as I find a wife, I'm going to want a job that gets me home every night. I said, okay, makes total sense. And then I interviewed a driver whose kids had left the house. They had all graduated. And he said he was about to bring his wife with him out on the road, and he was ready to hit the highway, see the country, and be gone. And that made me realize that where drivers are in their lives makes them view friction differently. What's friction in one stage of life may not be in a different one.
Right. I think the example, if I remember, is you talked about traveling when you're young. You'll go to the hostel. You'll share a room with complete strangers, and it's the greatest time in your life. And then as you get older, you become a little more successful, have a little more money in your pocket. You're like, well, I'd like my own room.
That's
and
right.
my own bathroom,
That's right.
All right. When we talk about friction, if we do want to reduce the amount of friction, which I think everyone, if we look at the way the entire customer service industry, anything that we deal with today, it's all about reducing friction. It's all about one click to buy. It's all about what's the least amount of steps I can do to get to the thing I want. What are some easy ways that fleets should be looking to reduce friction?
So we should start at the beginning of our process. We can start with orientation. What can we do to improve a driver's orientation experience? Can we cut back on the number of days? Can we do drug testing at home? Can we make our safety videos more exciting? Can we offer per diem pay? Little things. Then we could go on to safety. What can we do to improve the quality of our trucks? Can we get newer trucks? Can we get a different type of transmission? Any little thing helps. And I think what's so encouraging about this pay friction matrix is we often think we've got to just start paying drivers so much money if we want to get our drivers and keep our drivers. But it shows us that we really only have to make incremental differences in either pay or friction. So maybe we can't raise our pay. Maybe our president has said absolutely not. Well, then we can look at how much friction we've introduced to our drivers, and we can just take incremental steps, little things.
Now, I'd be remiss, kind of bumped the desk there, I'd be remiss not to promote, we have the second installment of our In the Driver's Seat ebook series live right now, and it's all about this idea of how does your actual hiring process affect drivers? And we look at things like, orientation process. And by and large, most people say, yes, it could be a lot shorter. It feels like you're wasting some time. However, when it came to like online orientation versus in-person orientation, and is there another type? I don't know. It was kind of split down the middle
Mhm.
of what everybody liked. And so it's kind of like, why not offer both?
Exactly.
Offer both.
Mhm.
And then, like you said, with, drug screening, everyone was like, do I really have to come in
Mhm.
and walk behind the curtain? Can I go to a local place to have that done? So those are some pretty easy ways to reduce the amount of
Very.
friction. Other stuff included, and I can't remember everything that's in there, but it's like, hey, even beyond like I have hired them, just as far as the recruiting process, it's like, hey, if you're about to call me, send me a text message first so that I know I can pull over and be in a spot where I can take that call.
That's right.
Even simple things like that make a big difference. All right, what are some other types of friction maybe further down the line?
Further down the line, so lots of issues with dispatchers. Forced dispatching is a big one. So, and really, a lot of the drivers that I talked to said they don't mind taking on extra loads or
Mhm.
working extra hours or getting home a day later. It's the way that they're spoken to when they're asked to
Right.
do this. It's like they're told, you have to do this, instead of, hey, man, I know you've got a wife and a kid at home. I'm so sorry to ask you to do this, but if you do, it'll get you a little bit of extra pay. We'll give you a day off in a week or two. Would you mind? That sort of thing.
I interviewed last year Blair Ewell of USA Truck. They do self-dispatch now.
I've heard of that becoming more and more common.
Yeah. So people tend to get really locked into like, this is the way we've always done it. But if there are a lot of ways to make the driver's life better and to reduce your turnover without just getting out the pocketbook and paying
That's right.
more. I feel like getting out the pocketbook is a reference from 1950. Does anyone get out a pocketbook anymore? Josh does, because he's an old man. All right. Well, McKensie, why don't you, because I feel like we've covered it pretty well. Is there anything else you would add to just like other areas of friction that people could be looking towards? I know like there are some things, and I don't have good expertise on how to fix it, but I know like parking, regulations, all that kind of stuff, those always come up in our surveys of like, yes, I hate this. In fact, I was editing the next installment of our ebook, and many drivers were like, if they ever give us like mandatory speed regulators on our truck, and I'm not sure if that's quite the right way to say that, they're like, we're out. We're not doing that. So those are other areas that it might be a lot harder to control, but just
That's right.
any way you can reduce friction is better.
There's also some areas that you literally can't control, which is a lot of drivers spoke on the public's perception of them
Right.
and just how hard it is to be a truck driver because they feel looked down upon. They don't feel respected. They feel like they're they're doing a very dangerous job being on the road with these big trucks,
Right.
and people just don't respect them and don't thank them. And so anything that we can do to make drivers feel appreciated, while we're not the general public, where they're the people that work closely with them, it will go a long way.
All right. Would you like to give the summary for this episode?
The summary for this episode is that drivers do care about pay and home time, but it's just a small part of the picture. It's more about having enough pay to make the friction in their lives feel worth it. And so we don't have to be the highest paying company out there, and we don't have to have the best home time, but every amount of friction we can reduce makes our pay less important.
That was episode 1 of season 3 of Digging Deeper. And we're this camera here, we're so happy to have you back. I'm excited to start another season, and we will see you for the live Q&A if you come, only for those that show up.